I think it's important to talk about my mistakes. And the mistake I made was, hi everyone, I am Presence. If you didn't know, I realised I never introduced myself at the beginning of videos, so I have to start doing that. Yeah, I am Presence, and if you're new, I applied for Economics and Management last year, 2019, and I got rejected. So I feel really awkward doing this TSA video, but I was surprised that I got so many DMs about it. And like, in all honesty, you don't see an Oxbridge reject talking about admissions test, but I feel like it is important to learn from people's mistakes, and if my rejection can help someone get in, then I feel like my rejection was more worth it. So I decided that I'm going to separate the TSA into 3 different videos, so one for section 1 critical thinking questions, and the other one for problem solving questions, and then the third one for the essay part. So what I'm going to talk about in this video is section 1 critical thinking questions and the books I did, and generally how I prepared in general. Like, you can either take this as what you shouldn't do because I got rejected, or you can take this as, actually, you know, as long as you try your best, you can't really predict what's going to happen, because I know for a fact that I tried my best, but I also know for a fact that on the day when I took the exam or the test, I was in a bad state. And I really do think it really was because I had a bad day on the day. So that's one thing that I just think I messed up there, honestly. I really did try my best, which is why I feel a tiny bit confident about making this video. I put a lot of effort in this video, as you will see later, so I hope that if it helps, please like and share the video to someone you know who's going to take this test, because I really believe that it will help someone. So yeah, let's get into the video. So before I talk about the books, I want to say, and also before you click out the video, what I'm going to do later is I'm going to go through, like, I used my really messy notes to spend a whole day on making a more cute version of the notes for you guys. So yeah, I did these, I did these notes for you guys, and yeah, but I'll talk about them later. And so first off, the books I used. So I used quite a lot of books, and I lost a book that I can't really find for this video. I used this one, number 1. Yeah, I was given this book, which is really nice, and I would read this on, like, when it was near the exam. I would, like, because it's like small, I would take this everywhere, and I would just like flick through questions when I had time. Which is the Ultimate TSA Guide, 300 practice questions, but this is for 2016's entry, but it's still the same because all the tests are the same. And then I had this one, TSA Paper Practice, volume 1 and 2. These are basically practice papers. This one I bought, which is kind of actually has those questions in it, but this one is the Ultimate TSA Collection Guide, Mock Papers and Solutions. And look at how thick this is, excluding my messy notes. Like, it's massive, and I did this book twice. I basically gave up A-levels for like 3 months to kind of focus on the admissions test, which is why I'm kind of worried for grades now, because I could have spent that time preparing for the TSA to do A-levels when, yeah, because I got rejected, so it feels like the TSA just like useless. But you know, that's why I hope that adding this video to the world is going to make my rejection just less useless, yeah. Anyway, this book is massive and thick, and there's so many questions. You might feel really overwhelmed in how you're going to do them, but you know, if you really want that grade, and if you want to practice, then you will find a way to do all of them, and probably do them twice. Yeah, but it's really good practice. Although, like, I wouldn't say the questions are exactly the same, but then I wouldn't say they're not the same. I would say it's really hard to like find questions that are exactly the same, but then you don't really know if the questions are going to be the same. But anyway, it's really good practice. And then this book, which is like recommended by everyone, is Think Can You Think. I really liked this book in that not just like the practice papers were kind of, I wouldn't say easy, but like really predictable. However, the guides in the middle, like basically the explanations of tricks and tips, that was really helpful. And yep, this one I bought. And everything I use, I will put the link in the description so you can check them out. But yeah, and then I also made, like, of course you have to do the real practice papers, which you can find online, and I'll also link the website. It's basically Oxford's TSA website thing. I forgot, but yeah, I printed out all the past papers. I have no idea how many times I did those papers. This is just one folder. I have another folder, but I lost it. By the way, I really think that I don't know, maybe other people did more. Maybe they did the same. Maybe I did too much. I have no idea. But so yeah, I firstly printed off all the past papers and did them, and then I did it again. I also went off to print like a whole book on this stuff. Yeah, so that was just, yeah, it was like a book online which you can get on the TSA. I think it was a Cambridge book. Just looking at this now just makes me want to cry so much. And I also, which I kind of threw them all in the bin, sorry, but basically what I did is I cut out, like, I took all the past papers and then I cut them into like individual questions, like flashcards, and make them into flashcards, but I separated out like them into like different, like the categories, like there's different types of questions, there's assumptions, there's conclusions, which I'll explain later. I will basically analyze each question and kind of pick out the like kind of key bits that I think are really important, which I am really mad at myself that I kind of threw them away because they would be really useful now, but I never thought of starting YouTube then, and I never thought of sharing it then. I also used another book which I lost somewhere at home, which is called Ace the TSA, which that one is an old one, and the questions are predictable at the end, but I think the problem solving and the shape questions were good. And if you are as crazy as me and want to get all the books, then I would say get that book as well. I also went on the BMAT website and I did every single BMAT paper, section 1, and I also borrowed books from my school's library on the BMAT papers, and I did their practice questions because I know that they're like the same as the books I mentioned, but the BMAT version. So I borrowed them from my school library and I did them because the BMAT section 1 is very similar to the TSA, although there's a tiny bit difference in terms of like the content, but like the general strategy is the same. So I did them as well, and the real BMAT past papers section 1, which are 35 questions. I think it's important to talk about my mistakes, and the mistake I made was, I think it was kind of burning myself out, being a tiny bit too worried about the test, thinking that it was like everything, because like the acceptance rate was 6% and the interview proportion was 3-1. So I mean, it kind of showed how much I wanted it, but then was it really worth the stress? Is it really worth all that work? When because of that prep, I neglected A levels, and if I could go back, what would I do? I would kind of definitely prioritize a little bit more A levels, like just because at the end A levels are more important, and you don't want to get to a situation where teachers use your progress during year 12 to determine your actual grades. I think it's really, really important that you put your anxiety levels and stress levels and just have a healthy, good mind on the test day, because I think that the week coming up to the exam I was extra nervous because I did all this work but I still felt like it was not enough. I started prep, I think. Basically, I started looking at the papers throughout the beginning of year 12, but not like seriously, just like getting a little bit familiar with it. And then I started doing papers like in June. So from June to October, yeah, from June to October, every day I would do a bit, or every week I would do a paper. Yeah, I always started with like not the real exam past papers, but I started with the BMAT papers and the practice BMAT papers, then the practice TSA papers and the book. So it took me like 4 months around, yeah, so 4 months of kind of quite intensely doing all these questions. And by the end, I was confident that I could nail the critical thinking questions, but I was still a bit wobbly on the mathsy side, on the problem solving questions. But I could do them. The test itself isn't hard. It's actually really easy the more you do it. But the most annoying thing about the test is that you only get 1 minute and 40 seconds per question. What you might like when you do it at home, and maybe up to a certain point when you practice a lot, you will feel like you've got it and it's okay. That's what, like, at home I could do the questions and I felt confident that I could do everything well in 1 minute 40 seconds, like per question. But then on the actual day, like when you're in the exam hall and you're writing, it just adds that extra, like a bit of like anxiety. Like some people thrive on it, they think that it gives you an extra boost, an extra, like, it helps you focus more. But for me, it kind of gave me a little bit more, like I had more mind blanks, I had more like pauses. My hand was shaking at the end, and every time I did one question wrong I would feel a bit like, damn, what's gonna happen next. And so that all together on the actual day in the exam was kind of what screwed me, I think, which is why I didn't get an interview at the end. So please, if you're watching this, please make sure that on the day you are not stressed out, you maybe meditate for a while. I love to do like visualization stuff, so just like kind of visualizing that you are succeeding and you already got what you want. But I think on the day I didn't actually do that. I think I was just, yeah. On the day I was a big mess, and I also wasn't feeling best as well. I think I was like sick 2 weeks before or something. I was just, yeah. It's on the day. You need to make sure that you're in a good headspace. And now I've talked about my mistakes, I've talked about the books I used, and let's go on to talk about how I prepared and more on specifically section 1, critical thinking.
So I've made a few different documents along the way when I was preparing, and the first thing I did was like make a sheet on documenting the scores that I got from like BMAT papers and TSA papers. At the beginning I got 16 out of 50, it was really bad, but slowly I improved. And yeah, I made note of the questions I got wrong, so when I went back to do the questions, I did the specific ones that I screwed up in the first place. I think having a sheet to track your progress, you can not only kind of boost your confidence because your score will improve over time, but also you can document the specific questions that you got wrong, and near exam time, do them again to double check and double revise, and revise the right questions instead of revising the ones that you got right all the time. And then I'd also made a document on just like random notes that I just thought were important as I was revising. And because it's really long and messy, I decided to turn my notes into a cheat sheet format with some cute drawings and make it all really nice for you guys. So I hope it will help, and if it did, then please share it to people and give a like and subscribe. And yeah, I did different documents for section 1 and section 2. So you could do your own, or you could download my cheat sheet, or you could buy the books, or you could do all of them. So for me personally, the TSA section 1 critical thinking questions were the easiest. And there are different types. Once you get it, you kind of manage to see it quite quickly. So the first type is conclusion questions. There are 2 types. You are either asked to draw the conclusion, which means the conclusion won't be obvious in the passage and you have to find it. And the other one is the easiest, which is identifying the conclusion, and it's just really straightforward. So the key is to look for the key words like therefore, hence, so, and they're normally short, straight to the point, and it has to be about the main topic. So you might get answers that are completely irrelevant and about a different topic, and obviously that's going to be wrong. I also looked at each paper to see like the question number and the question type, and I realized that they follow the same pattern, kind of. Like for conclusion questions, there are 9 questions per paper, and it will be on question 1, 4, 11, 15, 27, 28, 35, 39, and 45. If you check it, then I can promise that it's always going to be conclusion questions on those questions. I was going to plan to like remember them and do them all at once, but then I realized I can't actually do that. It's just hard to remember all of it and then do it in the day. Anyway, so what you need to know is basically you need to break down the passage, and there's always going to be a reason, like a supporting statement and a conclusion. And normally it's like one supporting statement and then another one which leads to a conclusion. And it can be in different formats, like it could be the conclusion first and then the supporting statement, or one supporting statement, the conclusion, and the other supporting statement. And the key is to read the questions carefully. There could be 2 conclusions, like the main conclusion and I forgot what you call it, the smaller mini conclusion. And so you need to identify what the main one is. And also, obviously, it's not going to be at the start or the end, or else it would be too easy, although it is already easy. So the key is to ask yourself, what is the purpose of the passage? Check which answer matches. What is the author trying to tell you to do? Normally it's like a call to action type of conclusion. And also I like to use the therefore test, which you might end up with 2 answers that you're not sure about. And so you can use the therefore test. For example, you find that one conclusion is that it's sunny and the other one is that I will buy ice cream. By the way, these examples I thought of course, has to include ice cream. My favorite food is ice cream, if you don't know. Anyway, yeah. So you have 2 different answers that could be, and you're not sure which one. You can use the therefore test and put them like, it's sunny, therefore I will buy ice cream, or I will buy ice cream, therefore it's sunny. And obviously the first one is right, and therefore you would know which one is the main conclusion. I will buy ice cream is the main conclusion. So common wrong answers from my experience is that they're either too strong or they're too weak, or maybe they're too explicit and already in the passage. Like for questions that are drawing conclusions, then you need to make sure that the passage doesn't already clearly state that conclusion. That's a common trap, I guess, we would fall into, is that we choose the conclusion that is obvious, but the question is asking you to draw the conclusion, which means the conclusion isn't obvious. So why choose the obvious answer? So you get 1 minute 40 seconds for each question, and really these conclusion questions you should be spending less than 30 seconds on it, I think. So yeah, this is from 2019's paper, the one I did, and yeah, the one I failed, but definitely not this question. And since you're here, I'm going to force you to practice, so I'm giving you 30 seconds to do this question. Don't skip over it, and yeah, I'll come back in 30 seconds. Time's up. So best express the main conclusion. Number 1, always read the question, and then I immediately see there's the however keyword. However, responding to climate change is much more important for humanity than for nature. And then it goes on to have some supporting statements in the history of the planet, blah blah blah. And then at the end you can see it says nature will find a way to move on, but climate change is potentially devastating for humans. So here you might be thinking these two both could be conclusions, so which one is right? I would it would be quite obvious that, however, responding to climate change is much more important, blah, 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 because this is an action that the author wants you to take. But if we aren't sure, then we can use the therefore test. So I put an A and a B next to them, and you can say A, therefore B, B, therefore A. So, however, responding to climate change is much more important for humanity than for nature, therefore, climate change is potentially devastating for humans. Or, climate change is potentially devastating for humans, therefore, responding to climate change is much more important for humanity than for nature. Clearly, number 2 is right. So we need to find an answer that kind of talks about this. And we can see already that question B is acting against climate change is more important for humans than for the environment, which is kind of the same as responding to climate change is much more important for humanity than for nature. So I would think that's the answer. And checking the other answers, A, people are quick to connect climate change policies with environmental protection. It's not really what the author wants to tell us. C, nature has always found a way to adapt to large temperature variations. In that case, then why do we need to kind of respond? So it kind of weakens the argument, I guess. D, nah, wrong. E, nature will find a way to adapt with climate change potential for humans. This is kind of like a trap, I guess. So we can use the therefore test because, yeah, it feels like we would either end up with B or E. And we can also use the therefore test on the answers. So B, therefore E, or E, therefore B. Read it out loud, and then you realize that B sounds right, and then you realize that the correct answer is B. So if you got B, then well done. So the next type of question is spotting flaws, and it's about explaining why conclusions don't follow from reasons and how it makes the conclusion invalid. So you need to be clear on what the conclusion is about and support the reasons that support it, which is why practicing the conclusion questions can also help with doing these questions. Well, it can help with all the questions. So it's kind of the conclusion questions, like the easy question, but also the foundation. So yeah, and I am sharing the common flaws that I found and also what I learned. This is my 3rd day on doing this video. I really hope that it's helpful. So please don't forget to like and subscribe, and also share it to friends who are also doing the TSA, because I really hope that this is going to help them. There's not many videos out there that, yeah, but there are good videos, but I would always say there's never enough videos. Anyway, so for common flaws, there is correlation and not causation, percentages, there's missing information, overlooking alternatives, and generalizing, which I will go on to explain. But from my experience, the flaw is kind of usually around a sentence that has an if, but not always, obviously. This is just I think, because these notes I made it ages ago, so I don't exactly remember why I wrote that, but I'm just writing it in case it might be helpful. So starting from overlooking alternatives, just using different examples that I made up, but kind of are the same. So her cat is pink, it must be a rare species. The flaw is that, maybe it's something else. It could be a different reason. It could be an alternative reason, like she could have just dyed the cat's fur pink. And for correlation, not causation, the statement could be, he had more sales because it was raining, but that's just a correlation. So the flaw would be that it's a correlation. It's not clear that it's because of rain that there's more sales. And you would find that in the answer, similar. For percentages, the questions that include 20% of something, 30% of something, for example, 20% of Tom's sweets are toffee flavoured, 30% of Kate's sweets are toffee flavoured, therefore Kate has more toffee flavoured sweets. And that would be, you can't make that conclusion, that's a flaw, because 20% of what? 30% of what? It could be the fact that maybe Katie had 10 sweets and Tom had 100 sweets, so 30% of 10 is definitely less than 20% of 100. So you can't just jump to the conclusion that Kate has more sweets. So yeah, be careful about that. Every time you see like numbers or percentages, I would like circle them, especially at the end. Like the questions get harder. Yeah, they get harder, and normally at the end it's not where they have lots of facts and figures, and that's when you have to be really careful. And really, the TSA, like the most annoying thing is just that it gets harder, and you just feel more drained, and that you have to do it you have to do it in 1 minute is like tough. Like the questions are really simple, but it's the timing and the fact that at the end the questions, when you're already drained out, you kind of have a lot of just facts like bombarded at you, and just yeah, that's kind of the reason why most people fail, I think. So maybe you want to start from the back, or I find it like starting from the hardest questions kind of slowed me down. So yeah, but it's up to you. So there are around 4 questions per paper for flaws. So it's question 3, 10, 21, and 34. Yeah, I kind of checked each paper and each question and went through every paper and just found out that they do have a pattern. So I thought I'd share. So yeah, make sure that you kind of know the conclusion and the reason supporting it before you kind of jump straight to finding the flaw. I think it just helps you structure the paragraph in your mind and makes finding the answer easier. So flaws can be assumptions, they can be missing information, they can be statements that weaken the flow of the argument, or extreme statements, or it can be like saying that there's only one method of doing something when actually there could be many different methods. By the way, I'm using all my notes to make these cheat sheets, although, and my experience, so I wouldn't say I'm copying from anyone. Although, you know, every single book you get is kind of talking about the same thing, so it's hard not to mention the same stuff. So I just thought I'd put it out there in case someone kind of goes and sues me on like copying someone, or like, yeah, it's from my experience and from my notes and all the books I read, and it's in my brain, so it's hard to not forget them. So yeah. And also be careful of like generalizing, in that you might see some keywords like some, only, anyone, and then in the answers you might see all. Like you can't, then that's like a flaw, because it's generalizing some people and then the answer is like all people. Like that's kind of like a mini trick to kind of quickly find the flaw. But obviously each question is different, so definitely pay attention to everything. So here's another question, flaw question, and you have 40 seconds this time, and don't skip it. You know, you have to take every advantage to practice, because why not? So here you go. So time's up, and I hope that you saw that immediately. I saw as well that it goes from talking about Africa to immediately talking about the Arctic, and it says it's universally recognised that Africa's conservation, tourism, blah blah blah. So tourism in the Arctic is welcomed. That already doesn't make sense. Just because it's good in Africa doesn't mean it's good for the Arctic. So it jumps from talking about Africa to the Arctic, and the fact that in the answer it says, for A, it argues a general rule on the basis of one successful example of wildlife tourism. General rule. It literally says general rule, and it's one of the common flaws about generalizing. So when you know these common flaws, then you might be lucky, and the answer might literally say, oh, there's something wrong with the percentage, or it's missing information, or there's a different way, there's a different method, alternative. So when you know these common flaws, it's kind of easier to quickly recognize the answer. So yeah, just pay attention to that. So the next type of question is assumptions. Assumptions are basically unwritten information that's needed for the conclusion to make sense. So when you think about the conclusion part, you had supporting statements straight to conclusion, But what you also have is the assumption that the author doesn't say out loud because it's probably too, like, really, like, everyone would assume that the assumption is true. Like, it's already assumed that it's true in order for the conclusion to make sense. And so in these types of questions, we are trying to find what that assumption is. The assumptions are similar to like a bridge connecting the supporting reasons to the main conclusion, so thinking of that way might help a bit. So the way I always check my answers is to use the not test. So I I take the answer from the multiple choice and then assume that it's not true, like just assume the opposite, and then put it in between the reason and the conclusion and read it out loud to see if the conclusion falls apart. So when you do that and if it makes sense, then you are likely to have the wrong answer. But if it doesn't make sense, then you've got the right answer, because it means that if you assume that the assumption is wrong, which makes the conclusion not make sense, then that means that assumption must be right, and you have to have that assumption in order for the conclusion to be valid. So that has to be the assumption. So yeah, that's all you need to really know for the assumption question, I think. Here's another question. Do not skip it, just do it. I know practicing is kind of, you don't really want to do it, but if you're watching this video and you've got it to this far, you are amazing, because it's already 30 minutes and I'm tired myself too. So just take a 2-minute break maybe, and then come back, and then I'll give you 30 seconds to find the answer. Yes, I'm being cruel. I know you get 1 minute and 40 seconds, but for these critical thinking questions, I really think you should do it as quickly as you can. So, yep, I am giving you 30 questions, 30 minutes, no, 30 minutes, 30 seconds, and your time starts now. Time's up. So the first thing that popped out to me was the keyword no surprise. It's no surprise that the number of motorists opting for re-education courses have tripled in 5 years. So there has to be an assumption around this in order for the author to say that it's like really easy, like it's no surprise, of course. So, and it's saying that the drivers have 2 different options, and then at the end, the main conclusion is re-education courses are a good idea in theory, but open to abuse by cash-starved police forces. So it's about money as well. And so then I look at the answers, and I really think that A sounds really like right, because the cost of running re-education courses is less than the combined contributions of participants. If this is not the assumption, okay, if we use the not test, if the cost of running re-education courses is more than the combined contributions of participants, then motorists would choose the other option, and it just doesn't, and the main conclusion just doesn't make sense. So the answer is A. So next we have principal questions, and there are 2 types of questions. So it's basically structure questions. So we have to either identify the argument with the same structure, or identify principles that are the same as the paragraph, like the same principle that's used in the paragraph. So yeah, a structure question. And the easiest way is to basically use A, B, C, or X, Y to make the structure simple, because the content doesn't really matter as much in these questions. So for example, I made this example up. If I eat chocolate flavoured ice cream, I will feel happy. If I eat a salad, I will feel healthy. I need to be healthy, but I can do that later, so I will eat the ice cream. This is exactly what happened today. So A for ice cream, B for happy, C for salad. And so the structure is if A, then B, if C, then D. I need D, but I can do that later, so I will do A. And then you go and find the answer that matches this structure. And it's straightforward, but it takes a bit more time, just because you need to find the structure, and then sometimes you have to go through each question and find the structure of each question, which kind of might take a bit more time, but then sometimes you just get lucky and get it right away. Not sure if this is gonna help, but like I kind of was really bored and I found that the trends, like the topics, they tend to like be like you only pay for what you use or what you like, yeah, taxes, subsidies, responsibility, respect, human rights. It's not really important. It's just I was bored and I just found it. And there are normally 2 questions per paper, so question 23 and 47 are usually these types of questions. For principal questions, I wrote try to check the final sentence because it's usually there, but not always, obviously. It's usually really clear in the passage and you can highlight it quickly, and it's quite obvious. The principle might have a few components, so it's important that you underline them clearly, and also be careful of keywords. So why some options might be wrong is that it's completely irrelevant, so it's not the principle at all. I'm talking about the principal questions, by the way. And maybe the wrong keywords. An easy trap is when the answer is saying how much, but the paragraph talks about a need instead of like the quantity. Or it could be opposite from the principle. It also could be missing elements. So for questions that need you to identify statements that use a certain principle, then you might find one that doesn't really apply the whole principle, but just parts of it. So now we have another example question, and don't skip it again. Do this question because if you want practice, then why not practice now on the spot? 1 minute because this one is a bit longer. And also, if you haven't done so, then please use 0.1 second of your time to hit the like button for the YouTube algorithm, because the more people see this, then the more people I can help, and the more that my rejection will feel like it was worth it. So, yeah, 1 minute, and let's go. Time's up. So what we can do is basically break the question down. So my neighbour is a criminal, we can call that Z. He's living in an expensive house, that can be X. And he's officially working only in a poorly paid job, that can be Y. And we can say that he has X despite Y, so he must be Z. He has X, he has an expensive house, despite Y, despite having a poorly paid job, so he must be Z. He must be a criminal. Or you could say, my neighbour is A because B, which is impossible, therefore C. My neighbour is A criminal, because B, he bought an expensive house, which is impossible because C, he's poorly paid. The tricky part is that you don't really know exactly what structure. Like sometimes the structure isn't exactly the same, but similar. And in this case, it's not exactly the same, but similar. And so we've got 2 different options and 2 different structures that could be the answer. So going through the questions, which will make this video even longer than it is, I will not go through that. But I'll quickly say stuff that for A, it says, so I assume. So already shows that it's a bit of uncertainty. The passage is saying that the author is certain that he knows the neighbour's the criminal, but in A, it's like so it's like really uncertain. So that's definitely wrong. C, no, wrong. D, so I think, again, wrong. E is if, again, it's clearly wrong. So A, D, and E both are really uncertain and it's not strong enough. And so that's a kind of not really a good, that's not the same structure basically. So B is the best because it is impossible, blah, 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 you must, blah, 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 blah. So impossible and must has like really, it's strong. in the passage the author is really strong about the neighbour being a criminal, and then you check the structure and it's the same, and so B is correct. And finally, we have weakness and strengthen questions. So they're basically the same type of questions, same method, except just in the opposite directions. So it's basically asking you to add a sentence or add some missing information that strengthens or weakens the argument. And for these questions, you have to remember that whatever the question is talking about, you have to assume it's true. And I think for these questions, it's best to just try and test your answers using the main conclusion and to assess impact that the answer has on the main conclusion. So for strengthening questions, your answer should make the conclusion more valid or increase the possibility of the conclusion. For weakening questions, it would be the opposite. Does it make the conclusion less valid, and does it decrease the possibility of the conclusion? So for weakening the argument, it should be adding a statement, for example, to undermine the assumption, or adding new evidence that will weaken the assumption. So in my notes, I wrote, for example, the passage might say that A causes B, and the answer that weakens the argument could be B causes A instead. So the idea that correlation doesn't mean causation, this whole concept, is very common in many different questions, which is why I really like it and really pay attention to it. And I made up my own test. So I made up my own true test, and I asked myself, if the answer is true, does it strengthen or weaken the argument? And I found common answers to be alternative factors, different causes, like counter evidence, and the correlation and causation one. And common wrong answers are it's just irrelevant, or it's opposite, so the answer says something that strengthens the argument when the question is actually asking you to weaken it. So here's a question. You have 50 seconds, and I know it's a long video. I did not expect this video to be that long, honestly, but you've come so far, and I really recommend you watching this video again maybe the day before the exam, just to a short 1 hour revision just before the exam is quite good. And yeah, don't forget to like and subscribe again, and share this video to anyone who you think it will help, because that's my goal. So yeah, your 50 seconds starts now. Time's up. So the first thing we identify is the main conclusion, because that's the argument and we need to know what strengthens and weakens the argument. So here it's obvious that the main conclusion is the USA's willingness to act proves that it's the only genuine superpower. And we are asked to find the answer that weakens the argument. And so the reasons of why the USA is the superpower is because the USA was willing to act, whereas the EU just did a meeting instead. And so what would weaken the argument? If we look at the answers, just go directly to the answers, I would say. A, Haiti is closer, so it's about proximity and not really about willingness to act, so it's kind of irrelevant. B, the European has many men in its armed forces. This is about size, so it's also irrelevant. C is that of the countries of the EU, only Great Britain and France possess the naval and airborne capacity. That's kind of irrelevant. Yeah, it doesn't weaken. It doesn't do ask yourself, what impact does it have? It doesn't really have much of an impact. D, the countries of the EU respond to this and all humanitarian crises individually because their armed forces are allied but not integrated. This is a really valid reason for why the EU did only meetings and didn't act. And because of this, they didn't act, which means US might not be the superpower. And for E, it's about the agenda and it's not really related about the willingness to act. And therefore, D is the right answer because it's clearly giving a reason why the EU didn't act, and because this reason is valid, it helps undermine the argument that the US is the only genuine superpower. Finally, we are at the last question. Oh, my back hurts already. And thank you so much for paying attention. I hope you are, and I hope so far it's helped. Please don't give up yet. We have one more question. 50 seconds. Let's go. Time's up. So, first off, what's the main conclusion? It's, again, at the end. Unless the government wants the level of drink driving to increase, it needs to ensure that far more pubs and clubs are built in rural areas. And the reasons for this is because people in rural areas have no choice but to use their cars. So we have to assume that this is true. We have to assume that people in rural areas are definitely going to use their cars. So what statement would help us strengthen the argument? Well, we can just check the answers right away. A and B seem irrelevant, so the legal alcohol limit for drivers is likely to be lowered in the near future. If this is true, then this just, so people won't need to drive, so no. The public being more aware of dangers of drink driving, this does not strengthen the argument. C, many pubs in rural areas are closing because of the reduced numbers of customers. This actually weakens the main conclusion and doesn't strengthen it, so this is the opposite, so it's definitely wrong. D, the population of rural areas is predicted to increase over the next 20 years. This is definitely right because the population of rural areas will increase. We were just told that people in rural areas have no choice but to use their cars. So this explains why drink driving will increase in the future, and so it strengthens the main conclusion. E, the police concentrate their drink driving campaign in towns and cities. This does not affect the main conclusion, so the answer is D. So before we go, I just wanted to give a little bit more general tips for Section 1 critical thinking. Remember, you have 1 minute 40 seconds per question. So what I did was make sure that I did really well in these questions, so I could do these in 30 to 40 seconds, and therefore I would have so much more time to focus on the maths questions, because trust me, like, the questions aren't hard. The hardest thing is time in this exam. And it's just shame because, honestly, why are we, like, in this day and age, why are we judging people based on how quickly they can solve questions? Because, you know, we have all the time in the world when, yeah, anyway, that's a rant. I should stop. So yeah, practice speed reading, practice separating and crossing out, like, the irrelevant stuff, because the questions will get harder, and what they do is basically they add extra stuff that is completely irrelevant to the question or to the answer. And it's also the time when you've done so many questions and you're tired and your brain is just shutting down, and then the questions just have lots of irrelevant stuff, which makes it even easier to make mistakes and get the wrong answer. And also, I would really recommend read the question first. Just always read the question first before the passage to know exactly what type of question you are trying to answer. And lastly, stay calm, because that's the biggest mistake I made, is that I didn't stay calm. I wasn't relaxed enough. And just try your best. Honestly, whatever happens, it will be okay. It's not the end of the world if you don't do well, but I believe that every one of you will do the best that you can. And I know how much work you've put in. I know how hard it can be. I understand how frustrating it can be and how mentally stressful it can be. And so don't stress, really. I know it's very competitive and hard, but I believe in you, and I know that as long as you've given your best shot, that's all you can do, and whatever happens at the end, you will always win. You will never lose, you will never fail, you only learn. So I wish you the best of luck, and please like and subscribe again, and share the video to anyone that you think it will help. And yeah, try your best and forget the rest. Stay tuned for the other parts of the TSA, and until next time.